Board Games follows the entrepreneur Marcus Dreer and his determination to accomplish his goals by any means necessary, even if it plummets him down a deadly hole of no return. For all of my book lovers out there, Board Games is a simmering drama that boils into a gripping conclusion, and you can find Board Games 1 and 2 now on Amazon. It'll be the perfect read this holiday season, and it's written by yours truly, so you won't be disappointed. You are now tuned into the SoCHiology podcast. SoCHiology is a lifestyle brand emphasizing Chicago culture, experiences, and stories, and connected topics abroad. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow, from the hearts and minds of Chicagoans themselves. Benny Lee is a man of many titles. He's a college professor. He's a business owner. He's an advocate. He's a mentor, a speaker, a leader. He's an author. He's a producer. But before all of those titles, he had another title, the original chief of the Apache Vice Lords. On this episode of SoCHiology, we're going to go into part 2 in a sub-series that talks about Chicago gangs and how they function. And Benny Lee is going to give us his personal story on how he was first introduced to the Vice Lords on the west side of Chicago, how the gangs functioned with each other, and how they coexisted with all of the other movements around them at the time, the Civil Rights Movement, the Black Power Movement, the Black Panthers with Fred Hampton out of Maywood. All of this, as well as his personal journey throughout the Illinois justice system and incarceration. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Whole Lotta Gang Sh, part 2. So you moved to Chicago when you was how old?
I was 9 when I came to Chicago.
You was 9 when you came to Chicago, and your father had got a job here, right? That's what brought y'all here?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what area did you guys settle into when you first touched down in the city?
We was in the Garfield Park area. They called it K-Town, right off of there in Van Buren.
And like, what was it like in K-Town around that time in your life?
This was in 1963.
63, yeah.
Yeah, this was in 1963, and you had a serious war between the Egyptian Cobras and the Vice Lords in that area there. But then right there in the meat area where we was at on Van Buren and Kildare, you had a lot of little small groups, you know, like you had the Warlords, then you had a group that was older than us, the Seven Hoods. And, yeah, they was a little older than us. And then a lot of their younger brothers and cousins that I ran with, we became baby hoods.
Baby hoods.
Then you had the Gladys boys, the Monroe boys. So you had a lot of little cliques, you know, like little blocks that made up little street gangs right there.
Yeah, and this was 63. 63 in K-Town. 63 in K-Town. Yeah. And was it like a predominantly Black neighborhood at that time? Was it still some whites, you know, around in the area? Like, you know, how was the integration and segregation at that moment?
Yeah, that area had became a predominant Black community because Blacks was moving across Pulaski going west. And it was maybe 3 years after that, we moved further west on Cicero, where it was predominant white. But to the most part, in that area there was predominant Black.
Predominantly Black, okay. And so when you moved to Cicero, when you guys moved close to Cicero, did you experience any racism, anything like that?
Yeah, we wasn't in the little town Cicero. We was on the streets.
Right, yeah. That's what I meant. Correct. Yeah. That's what I meant.
Yeah, and we were pretty much in between Madison and the 290 Expressway on Cicero. The block I lived on, it was 2 blocks in one, the 48 to 4900 block on Jackson between Cicero and Laverne. And we was like 1 out of 3 Black families that lived on that block. And then Laverne going back west was predominantly white. Yeah.
That's a very thin line. You know what I'm saying? Very thin line. And, you know, so we talk about 63, but we all know what happened in 68, you know, when King was murdered and, you know, the riots and all of that. So it's like the 60s was just really, if you really just zoom out outside of Chicago to the whole country, the 60s was really like a real tumultuous decade and a boiling point, you know what I'm saying, of racial aggression and, all of these things that was going on around the country. And when you zoom back into Chicago, it's like we already know the Chicago race riots that happened in 1919, but a lot of racial incidents was going on in Chicago, right? And there's a myth that says in that era, and I'm sure you could speak to this and confirm if this is true or not. It's a myth that in that era, a lot of black gangs were formed for protection in their neighborhoods. Is that true? Can you expound on that? How did that play into you guys forming these gangs and these cliques and what have you?
Well, yeah, when you look at say the west side of Chicago, a lot of blacks was moving out of that era down by Jewtown, around Halstead and Troop Street, 14th Street, 15th Street, going south, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because Roosevelt, you wouldn't go across there because you was in Little Italy.
Yeah.
That's where Sam Giancana, the Italian mob, was right there.
Yeah.
And so you start seeing a lot of blacks moving from that era going west, across Damon, up across Western. It's that's going into Lawndale, which was a predominant Jewish community in the late 50s, going into the early 60s. You start seeing a flux of blacks moving
Mm-hmm.
in Lawndale first, because
Mm-hmm.
when you look at the black community on the west side, the first black community on the west side was in that Jewtown area, like 14th Street, 15th Street, Troop Street up to Ashland, right? That was like the first black community. And then as time went on, blacks started moving around Lake Street.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this before they built those houses. Matter of fact, this before they even built the Eisenhower and the Dan Ryan Expressway.
Oh yeah, we way back. We way back.
Yeah. But you start seeing when Mayor Daley became the mayor, to keep the blacks from crossing Wentworth on the south side. That was called the Black Belt then between 42nd Street and 27th Street. That was called the Black Belt. That's where the actual 1919 race riot actually happened.
Yeah.
Now it's called Bronzeville.
Mm-hmm.
And blacks was going across Wentworth over into the stockyard and all that. That's where it got that name, back of the yards, behind the stockyard.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so the
Mm-hmm.
blacks that was coming from the south during the Great Migration in the 30s, those blacks coming from the south ran into a confrontation with the blacks that was already here, because the black that was already here felt like the blacks coming from the south was imposing upon what little gain they had already accomplished. So
Yeah.
that detoured the blacks from the south to go west, and they would get off of Union Station, and start in that area, what they call the village, Apple Homes, down by Halstead, Ashland, 14th Street, 15th Street. And then as they outgrew that little area, they far as they came up was, I think, like up to Racine.
Mm-hmm.
Then a lot of started going toward Lake Street, between Lake Street. They was trying to cross Harrison, which was a German community, but it locked them into that little box. And then when Mayor Daley became the mayor, he built the Dan Ryan Expressway as a border for blacks crossing Wentworth. And then he built those housing projects from 60-some South to 22nd Street and shot them up in the air.
Yeah.
And on the west side, to prevent blacks from crossing Harrison Street, right, over into that German community, he built the Eisenhower Expressway. And then he built the Henry Horner projects and shot blacks in the air. And as blacks were trying to go west, then he built Rockwell projects to contain the blacks in that area. And then those blacks that was trying to go north of Roosevelt Road into the Italian neighborhood, that's when he built those housing projects, Abla homes that they call the village, and
Mm-hmm.
them 16 stories, the village there,
Yeah.
just to contain blacks in those areas there. So
Yeah.
that's
It's
what,
like it's like they was building barriers. They were literally building barriers,
right,
to keep African Americans, blacks in these areas.
right. And that was going on like in the late 30s and early 40s. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But now you had a lot of little small groups. But see what prevented blacks, young black youth that would probably be street gangs back then, from becoming street gangs, you had the policy kings. They ran the policy numbers racket.
Yeah.
So young black guys then that was old enough to become part of a gang would become a policy runner. And the policy kings, they bought they paid for people to get businesses going and send kids to school and all this kind of stuff. So that kind of prevented from black gangs to flourish in the black community, because you didn't start hearing nothing about black street gangs until like the late 40s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so, like you said, the late 40s, and you touched down in Chicago in the 60s. What was the introduction to the Vice Lord organization for you? Walk us through that. So you just told us about the barriers that were created by city of Chicago politicians, the mayor, and the housing projects and all this. You just gave us a very brief and detailed overview of that. Now, the ramifications of that is the white flight, right? Of the little whites that was still there. But then now you just got all these black people. You already told us about the conflict between the blacks that was in Chicago versus the blacks coming to Chicago in the Great Migration. But now you got all these blacks here. Everybody ain't on one accord. Everybody not working together. So what introduced you to the Vice Lord organization?
Well, like I said, I moved out of K-Town in 1966 on Cicero in Jackson. And when I got there, you had a group of the Cicero Vice Lords.
Cicero Vice Lords.
They were a branch of the Vice Lords that came out of Lawndale. Because there was like a gap. Because see, Pulaski Road was a dividing line from the Vice Lords and Egyptian Cobras. See, the Egyptian Cobras ran K-Town, from Pulaski back to Cicero. That's all K-Town. Every street that ran north and south started with a K. So the Vice Lords was east of Pulaski, going toward Lawndale, Homer, and Kersey, right? And so the Cicero Vice Lords was the first branch of Vice Lord that came west of Cicero, but like that big void there between Cicero and Pulaski, all that K-Town, those were Egyptian Cobras. So we lived on Laverne and Jackson. That's one block west of Cicero. Okay. And they had the Cicero Vice Lords, right? And by us being young, we was like in the 7th grade by that time, 13, 14 years old. And we had to fight these white boys to go swimming at Columbus Park, which is 5500 West. And we was coming from like 47 and 4800 West, traveling through this white neighborhood to get to Columbus Park. And we got noticed by the Cicero Vice Lords as a little clique, a group. It's about a good 40 of us. And we were like mostly 7th and 8th graders at that time.
And that's like a large group. 40? That's a large group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was in 66 and 67 when we started getting noticed. And how I got into the Vice Lords, they first we used to throw rocks at them and let them chase us, play that kind of game, and they would catch us and beat us up and all that. And then one day they just out of nowhere surrounded us on Laverne and Gladys. And they said, if you guys gonna be in this area, y'all gotta be Vice Lords. And we didn't even see ourselves as a gang. We were just young guys, just fighting whites and trying to hang out in the hood, right? And so they said it's gonna be a nation meeting at Mandel Church. That's 5000 West on Congress, right there, Congress and Laverne. They said, now be there. That's this Friday. Y'all need to be there, right? And so when they left, we didn't even have a name for ourselves. So his brother named Troy Martin. Now he's known as King Troy of the Mafia Vice Lord. Troy said, well, Geronimo is an Apache warrior that fought the whites. And we fighting these white boys. Why don't we become Apaches? And so we all voted on it. And that's how we got the name Apache Vice Lords.
That's how it started.
So when we went to that nation meeting, you got guys like Alfonso Alfred, who took over the Vice Lords because Pepperlo, the founder, had stepped down by that time. And then you had our older guys off Cicero, This guy named Slim, he come from off 16th Street. It started the Cicero Vice Lords. He ended up dying, and then this guy named Charles Norris took it over. So they was all at the church there, and they introduced us as their shorties of Cicero. And so that's when we got identified as the youngest branch of the Vice Lord Nation, Apache Vice Lord. And then they recorded me in as the youngest chief of the Vice Lords. At the top, I was 13 or 14, and I became a Vice Lord and a chief all in one day. Put it like that.
Wow. So you got all right. So you and your 39 comrades, that y'all traveled together because it was 40 of y'all, right? You said about 40. We estimate it was about 40 of y'all. Y'all just mad at y'all business. Y'all just trying to stick together for protection. Right. And then out of nowhere, you got some Vice Lords that basically draft y'all. They like, look, you coming through here, then, well, you got to be one of us, right? Now, since y'all younger, y'all basically obliged to that. And you're like, okay, cool. So overnight, you become not only a Vice Lord, but you become the chief too.
Right.
Overnight. Like, how did that make you feel? Like, did it stroke your ego? Did you feel like you was the man now? Like, how did that make you feel after all of this, transpired?
No, I was scared and nervous.
Yeah.
Because, when you identified as the chief, the buck stopped with you.
Yeah, right. Correct.
So if any static happened, everybody going to look at you. Like, for example, I remember we was in school one day, and this guy, he had moved off Alaska, kind of tough guy, right, named Calvin Jackson. And he came into school, right? He was a rough guy.
Okay.
And so one of my guys, Troy and Dwayne, the two of my guys, Troy and Dwayne, they came to my room and they said, hey, man, Calvin Jackson. He said, Calvin Jackson is saying ain't going to be no Apaches up in here, man. So now I'm the chief. They coming to me, so I got to deal with this, right?
Oh, man.
So I said, well, where he at, right? So I got to step up, man. And he said, well, I just saw him go in the bathroom. So I went in the bathroom. I told them, man, I said, look, y'all wait right here. Let me deal with this. So I went in there one-on-one to him. I said, man, what the fuck you talking about? Ain't going to be no patches up in here. And he started talking crazy. I said, look, we can shut this shit down right now today, right? And I said, well, come on with it. Come on, let's fight, right? Let's box. He tried to swing at me, and I shoot and drop. Next thing you know, he folded up and stuff. I said, as a matter of fact, from this day on, you a motherfucking Apache, and I need to see your ass on Apache Corner tonight when we up there. You get that? He's like, yeah, man, right? So we come out the bathroom, and my guys looking at me wondering what happened. I said, now he's a motherfucking Apache, and if this motherfucker ain't up there tonight, I need y'all to beat his ass, right? And so I stepped it on off, because now I'm the chief, so I gotta, step up. So a lot of situations, like even with some of them old Cicero Vice Lords, they used to mess with some of my little guys. They're coming, so-and-so did. I said, fuck it, man, come on, let's mob up. With about 5 or 6 of us to go up on Cicero with them older Cicero Vice Lords. I said, man, what the fuck is all this? I had to be the spoken. So being that leader wasn't easy. And a lot of times I was in a scary situation, man. I had to do some shit that I was afraid to do, but being in that position, and then you don't want no reputation as a punk.
Yeah.
And
how old were you? How old were you?
I think I was 13 in 70, in 67. Yeah, I was 13 in 67.
13. So you was a chief at the age of 13. You were in junior high school, elementary school, and these are the things that you got to worry about. You basically became, you had to run the streets, basically. You was like the politician. You was the go-to man. You know what I'm saying? You was the CEO. That's a lot of pressure. And like, what was your home life like while you was involved in like all of this?
Well, my family was a middle-class family. My father was a welder, right? He worked at National Casting Company right there on 14th and Laramie. My mother was a registered nurse, right? So it wasn't like we was poor,
Yeah.
My father got off work. I had to have my butt at home by 5 o'clock, chores done, sitting at that dinner table, man. And that dinner table like group therapy. So a certain thing I just couldn't engage in the evening in the neighborhood because my father would just come around the corner, any unexpected. But
Yeah.
what happened in my case, my father's shift changed from 8 to 4 to 4 to 12. And
Mm.
that's when I got loose. Because now when I get out of school, my father would be at work. So I can run circles around my mother because she had to tend to my three younger sisters. Because it was six of us. Three boys, three girls. The boys were the oldest.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I would time my father. I knew his lunch break was at 8 o'clock. And he might come around there on his lunch break and stuff. So I had all that stuff. I would eat back to the house, make like I'm cool. And my mama thinking I'm all right. And then she would go to sleep and we sneak out the basement. So that's how I got pulled into a lot of stuff because my father's shift had changed.
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of like a weird twist of fate, ain't it? Because it's
Yeah.
like, you was the chief on the streets, but you weren't the chief at your house. But once your father's and his schedule changed and all of that, it's kind of like it allowed you to continue, everything that you was involved in with no interruption. It's like a weird twist of fate how that happened. Um, so you're the chief of the Apache Vice Lords. You hinted on the Cicero Vice Lords. How did your gang, your faction, coexist with the other factions of the Vice Lords? How did they coexist with other gangs on the West Side, like the Four Corner Hustlers? How did y'all ever come in contact with the GDs on the South Side, the Stones? Let's talk about that real quick.
Well, well, it wasn't no such thing as GDs back then. It wasn't no
Okay.
GDs. GDs came about in prison. Larry Hoover, when he left the street, he was not even a GD. The GDs didn't even exist then. And
Mm-hmm.
then the Disciples and the Stones, those were South Side gangs.
Correct. Yeah. Correct.
The largest gangs back then were the Egyptian Cobras was the largest gang, and then you had the Imperial Chaplains, and the Vice Lords were just becoming a large street gang on the West Side. Then
Mm-hmm.
you had the Roman Saints. Then you had the Goon Squad. All those were some large gangs on that West Side. Vice Lords wasn't the largest at that time. And me being in the position I was in, like say if the older Vice Lords had some situations, they would come to me and say, I need you and your guys to meet us over here. So we would do certain things like carry pistols, lay traps and shit like that. You'd be used as decoys because we was young. I remember one night they had to go deal with a situation down on the low end in K Town, and me stepping up like I am, right? They said, "Here, Shorty, take this," and they gave me a 44 Magnum,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I put it in my waist. Now I'm scared, man. I ain't never had a gun in my possession ever in my life. I ain't never shot nobody ever. But
Yeah.
I know we're gonna go down this other end, finna move on these guys. And I know when something happens, they ain't finna turn around and say, "Hey man, give us the thing." They gonna turn
Yeah.
around and say,
You got
"Shorty,
you got to do it. Yeah. Yeah.
so I'm really scared, man. But I didn't have the courage to tell them, no, I don't want to do it because I want to be recognized as having some heart, right? But really, I was scared, man. And through the grace of God, did nothing happen. And
Mm-hmm.
when we got back up on Cicero, they like, yeah, we told you, man, Shorty cool. You think he run the mob over there and all this stuff. So that night, man, my dilemma was I was ashamed that I was scared,
Mm.
right? And I had to prove to myself that I was cut for something that I really wasn't cut for, right? And so the next day, my homies, they like, yeah, Billy, we heard you were with Mookie and Peanut and the man. They told me you had the thumper and all that stuff. I'm like, yeah, man, you did. And I got to explain what happened, but I didn't tell them, man, I was scared to death.
Mm-hmm.
So from that point on, I'm trying to prove that I'm cut for this here. So I became real aggressive, like, give me the pistol. I got it. Move. I got this here, trying to prove to myself that I'm cut for that. But I really wasn't cut for that, man.
Mm.
So yeah, so I kind of destroyed my own self by trying to be something I wasn't, man.
Mm.
You know.
And things would just you would get deeper and deeper with it. The more the gang grew, I would assume the more territory you guys acquired, because you guys did acquire more territory, right?
Yeah, now we did. Now the Folk on the Hustle, they started on Jackson and Pulaski around same time we started, around 1966. King Wheat, Walter Wheat, he's the founder of the Folk on the Hustle. He originally was an independent Vice Lords. Him, Willie Lord, all of them were independent Vice Lords. And then Walt moved on Wilcox and Pulaski, and they went to Delanois School. Like they was in the 7th, 8th grade. We went to May School. We was in the 7th, 8th grade, right? And they first branch was by Spencer School, like around Laverne and Fulton, West End, that area there. And so we was at a basketball game one night at Resurrection School, and as we was leaving, these guys, they was going toward Madison. We were going our way, right? Some of my guys knew some of them guys because they was from Spencer and all that. And so all of a sudden, a shot go off. Somebody done shot, right? Mm-hmm. And so we like, what? And then they holler, "Faux love." So I'm asking my guy what they say. And this guy, Bruce Benson, said, "Man, that's them Folk on the Hustlers. They be over there by Spencer School." But I ain't never heard of no Folk on the Hustlers, mm-hmm. right? And so we met on Apache Corner the next day. I said, "Man, we got to go over here, man, and we got to look into these Folk on the Hustlers. They shot at us last night." I had sense enough to know, being a mob, you got to defend your rep, and that make you look like a punk. If somebody that shot at y'all ain't did nothing. I had that much sense. So we went all across Madison, and we whooped everybody in our age group that we thought might have been a Folk on the Hustler. And we marking up their area, Apache, AVL, right? And then nobody say they was a folk. And then about 2 days later, one of my guys, Jason Domino, was talking to this guy, right? And he said, "Hey, man, I need you to meet Fred Gage. He the chief of the Folk on the Hustlers." And I said, "Man, y'all shot at us the other night." He said, "Man, no, we were just fucking around. We really want to shoot at y'all. But I was talking to Jason, man, we want to unite with y'all, right?" And so we talked, so we agreed we'll unite with them. And so we went over their turf, because we thought we was the roughest. And we gonna go over there, we gonna come over there where y'all at, right? So we met in a lot right on Laverne and Fulton. And the way back then, the way you united, one of your guys boxed one of their guys and vice versa, all that kind of stuff. And so that's how we united. They became Folk on the Hustle Vice Lords, right? And so they was like allies to us. Right. Later, they became like a opposition to us later, because of some that happened while I was in St. Charles. When I went to St. Charles, that happened. That tension between the foes but by that time, the Apaches that changed his name to Insane Vice Lord.
So the name was changed, but it was the same faction pretty much.
Yeah, well, when I was in K-Town, I was a baby hood. We were 7 hoods.
Right.
And the old 7 hoods moved on Cicero while I was in St. Charles. And they was in St. Charles with me, and they was going home before me. And I was telling them, I said, "Man, now y'all up on Cicero, we Vice Lords, man. Get up with my guys, man. Troy, Big Red, all them, man. Champ and all them guys, Willie Cage, get up to my guys, man. We Vice Lords." So when they got out, right, and they had a meeting, and so both groups dropped their names. The 7 hoods dropped their names, and my Apaches dropped their name, and that gave birth to the Insane Vice Lord. So when I came home, everybody was expecting me to step back into play. One, I didn't like the name Insane because I had sense enough to know Insane mean you was crazy. I didn't never like that name.
Yeah,
I didn't agree with that name, right? And then the guy that did said he's gonna be the chief of the Insanes. He was our chief when we was baby hoods, a brother named AJ, right? And so most of them guys was my guys before I left. And they pulling at me like, "Man, you the real chief." And then Walt Wheaton, Fred Gage, the Folk on the Hustle, they were like, "Come on, man, you really the chief, man. Step and play." Because Walt, he didn't have no respect for AJ because he shot AJ. AJ almost died, and he didn't retaliate. So Walt didn't have no respect for him, but they respected me from back in the Apache days. Yeah, I was telling them, I said, "No, man, I'm a player now, man. I'm trying to give me some money. I ain't with all that gang banging shit no more." But then Fred and Walt, they was trying to get me to turn the Insanes to foes. No, I can't do that, man. This is home here. I can't face these guys. We can't do that. So me and AJ talked first. He was saying me and him both could run. I said, no, leave it like that. I'll just support you because I'm off the road, right? And we agreed he remained who he was, but respect the fact I'm a player now. I ain't with all this game banging shit. But when shit would happen, like they had serious confrontations, say with the Black Souls or with the foes, they can call on me, pull me out the pool hall or something, and I would step up and represent who we are.
Yeah, because you still had your reputation, so therefore you still had rank amongst
Yeah.
the people, and all of that. I wanna take a quick backpedal to two things. First is, in the late '60s, how did the Vice Lords and the foes and all of that coexist with the Black Panthers out there on the
Well, keep in mind, Fred Hampton came out of Maywood, and they started their branch of the Panthers. They office was right off of Oakley and Madison, right? They're further east, but they opened up a black library on Van Buren and Cicero, and we should go in there to get out the code. And they would teach us different things about history and the conditions of black people, right? But there was a little tension at one time where Bobby Gordon, them, as the heads of the Vice Lords, saw that a lot of young Vice Lords was passing out some of the Black Panther literature. And see, the Panthers, they believe in calling the police pigs, shoot the pig, and that was not Vice Lords' intention of their script. Because in fact, it was two police commanders that got with the Vice Lords and helped them to organize a conference where they pulled off a conference. They brought all those businesses like Kraft Food, Marshall Fields, Bell Telephone Company, Western Elect, all those companies together, and the local legislators together. They had this conference, and they appealed to them that they older now and they trying to do something different for these young brothers, right? So they won't go down the path they been. And out of that, that group of businesses and legislators became Operation Bootstrap. And their initial intent was to give the Vice Lords, the Roman Saints, and the Egyptian Cobra, they came together to pull this off, right? Initially, some support letters so they can get grants. And Sears and Roebuck became the Vice Lords' fiscal agent. Yeah. But there was some tension because they started noticing little guys like us having this Black Panther literature, and they was afraid that we wouldn't know how to respond to the police if they called us with the literature and all that stuff. So they, you remember the newsman, anchor man on, I think it was on Channel 9, Warner Sanders?
It rings a bell.
Yeah, Warner Sanders at the time, he was the director of the Better Boys Foundation, BBF, right at 15th and Pulaski.
Okay.
And you probably heard of Eugenie Perkins. He won that famous poem, "Hey Black Child, You Can Be What You." He's the author of that poem. Plus, he wrote that book, "Home is a Dirty Street," and then Exposure Chicago Black Street Gang. Well, anyway, he was a social worker there, and so they mediated a meeting between the Black Panthers and the Vice Lords. And so they came out of the meeting agreeing they all was on the same page. It's just that the Vice Lords didn't believe in calling the police pigs and all that stuff. Because Vice Lords had an open house with the police and all this stuff. Because they believed in community and they knew police was part of the community, but they had to have those relationships so they could slow down harassing guys and all that kind of stuff there. But that was like the only infraction. But now there was a coalition. Well, the Panthers had formed the Rainbow Coalition.
Correct.
With the young patriots on the north side and poor white folks and the young lords. They were like a Hispanic version of the Black Panthers.
Right.
And so that coalition met with the LSD. That was a coalition with the Vice Lord Stones and Disciples. That's what LSD stood for, Lord Stones and Disciples. And they had a citywide coalition shutting down construction sites throughout the city and telling people not to riot and all that kind of stuff. So Fred Hampton, he was real, them Panthers, they wasn't like street thugs. They were like college students. Yeah. So they were politically inclined, all that. And so it was a big meeting supposed to happen down at Grant Park. But the FBI had what they call a COINTELPRO movement. counterintelligence, where they would put uh, uh, one group against the other and get them to not trust each other to keep ruckus going on. And they sent a letter to Jeff Ford saying if he showed up, that Fred Hampton of the Black Panthers going to have him killed, and sent one to Fred Hampton saying it showed Jeff Ford going to have him killed. So that caused the distrust there, right? But there was a coalition building between the Panthers, the Vice Lord, the Stones, and the Disciples, and them other groups, because now because by this time everybody was getting these grant monies.
Yeah.
And it's what they call a self-help movement. The Vice Lords that got incorporated August 27, 1967. That's when they got incorporated as Conservative Vice Lord Incorporation.
Mm-hmm.
And they started getting monies from the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Company, and they started hiring they were hiring us, our group, to clean up our neighborhoods. And we got paid to clean up our neighborhood. They opened up 2 teen towns, House of Lords, where we go and do our homework and tutoring, play games and all that, get us off the streets. They had the African Lion, which was a boutique where they sold dashikis and Afro picks and all that kind of stuff. And then they had Teen Town, which was a restaurant on the northwest corner of 16th and Lawndale. Then they had 2 Tasty Freeze ice cream parlors and stuff. So they were doing a lot. And they united with the Stones because one of the original Vice Lords, Leonard Calloway, was the first cousin of the founder of the Black Stone Rangers Board, Gene Harrison.
Mm-hmm.
So that brought that relationship together. And so the Vice Lords would go out south to help the Stones shut down the construction in Woodlawn. And the Stones would come out west and help the Vice Lords shut down construction, like when they was building UIC and all that. And so the Disciples kind of joined it. But keep in mind, this was a movement era. Mm-hmm. You had the Black Power movement going on.
Civil
Martin
rights.
Luther King was still alive.
Yeah.
He was living in Lawndale, right? And Mayor Daley didn't want him here. And so those black ministers organized to prevent King from speaking at their churches so he wouldn't have access to the black masses. And so Reverend Al Sampson, he was like the street outreach for King now. And he would met with the different street gangs and brought them and introduced them to Martin Luther King. And so when he marched through Marquette Park, those was Black Stone Rangers and Disciples that marched with him. And when he marched through Cicero, those are Vice Lords that marched with him through Cicero.
Mm-hmm.
And again, by me being young and in that leadership role with the youth, my role was to make sure my guys didn't walk in these people's grass when we walked through their neighborhood. And we finished a candy bar, put it in our pockets, and we had to understand those 6 principles of nonviolence, right?
Which were?
One of them, the first one is nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people, not cowards. That you got to have the courage to practice nonviolence. You have to have the courage to speak about unjust situations. You can't worry about it. If you go and address this unjust situation, you might go to jail or you might get shot. If you worry, then this work ain't for you. You might as well go home. You got to have the courage to meet it head on. Then the second principle is to build a beloved community wherever you go. So what that looked like, wherever I go, I'm building a beloved community. I'm trying to reconcile things with people, work out stuff, mediate stuff. Then the third principle is, can you accept suffering without retaliation for the sake of the just cause? Somebody might disrespect you, challenge you, threaten you, but can you accept that form of suffering without retaliation for the sake of the just cause? Then the fourth one is, you got to avoid inner spiritual violence to prevent outward physical violence. And can you live up to that? And then the fifth one is, we attack the forces of evil, not the people that's doing evil. So we don't attack police officers that shooting blacks. We attack the police department because that's the source. Because as long as that system is there to safeguard and protect that police, he's going to keep on doing it. So until you dismantle that system, which is the force of evil, you're going to always have another police and another one doing that there. So those are like just the principles of nonviolence. Then they had the steps of nonviolence. Get your facts together first, right? Research your facts. Then the second one is share your information, educate those, bring even your opponent to a new awareness of what you see, because you enlighten them on your facts might get them to change their views on this situation and all that. And then listen to your opponent, because they might share something with you to make you look at the way you see it a little bit different, you know.
That's beautiful because like everything that you just said is it shows how I'm gonna just say Black organizations are not a monolith. You got the Vice Lords, you got the Foes, you got the Stones, but you got all of these communities branching together when need be. You got the Civil Rights Movement, you got the Black Power Movement, the Black Panthers. You have all of these branches coming from one tree, that all within its own way is trying to better the Black communities, is trying to protect the Black communities, is trying to get justice, equality, right? You got all of these things going on at once. So you mentioned St. Charles a couple times. Can you let our listeners know what St. Charles is or was?
St. Charles back then was the Illinois State Training School for Boys, and it was ran by the public aid system because youth was considered delinquents then. And that's where they sent you to St. Charles. And it was different than what it is now, because see, back then we slept in dorms, we slept in cottages, we had cottage parents, we wore our own clothes, right? Matter of fact, everything we ate in St. Charles, we grew it. You had brothers lived in farm cottages that grew the corn, that grew the potatoes, that grew the beans. We even had the cannery where brothers were canning peaches and stuff like that, putting beans in cans and stuff. We had the butcher shop where brothers was taught how to kill a cow, how to strip it, how to cut it up. And then you had brothers worked in the butcher shop where they cut it up and they made hamburger out of that beef, made pork, steaks and all that kind of stuff. This is what we did as youth in St. Charles, right?
Yeah.
That you got a skill there, but it's different like that now. Now it's like a jail, and St. Charles is where the Vice Lords was founded at in 1957. That's what Pepperlo was at in St. Charles when he organized the Vice Lords in Hardin Cottage, right? And so that was like you got some respect, especially if you was a Vice Lord, you ended up in St. Charles, because that's where it started. Like I ended up down there. I got scapegoated, really. When Martin Luther King got assassinated in April 4th, 1968, and that caused a lot of racial tension nationwide, really.
Yeah.
And so that was the same year that we graduated out of the 8th grade, along with the folk on the hustle. They graduated out of the 8th grade at Spencer School. So we were that largest group of blacks to go to Austin High School. So that means we had to travel as a group through this white community and flood this all white school. One day I was in my class and 4 guys, white guys, decided to come and attack me, right? So I'm boxing with them, right? And so happened 4 of my guys was coming down the hallway, they got in it, right? And that led to other guys getting into it, right? And so when it was all over with, all the blacks got suspended. Nothing happened to the whites. They say I was the ringleader, and I was the only one that ended up in juvenile court. And when I went to court, they asked my parents if they wanted me to go to school. And my parents, of course, said yes. But man, my mama hollered so loud when that sheriff grabbed me and handcuffed me, took me out that courtroom. I look back and I see my father slump down. Man, I'm 15 years old. I'm thinking my family done gave me away. They don't want me. I'm thinking these people bold because I ain't did nothing but defend myself. And I ain't never spent the night in the Audi home. I left that courtroom, sat in intake for maybe 20 minutes. They put me on the van with some other guy that was in the Audi home and drove us straight to Little Joliet. Now back then, Little Joliet was the maximum security prison for youth. And they sent me to Little Joliet because it was a diagnostic center too, where they decide where you're gonna go. St. Charles, Hannah City, Giant City, Kankakee, those little camps and stuff. But I went to camp for 3 months. But when I got this Joliet, I ain't never been to Audi home. But all them guys, they come from the Audi home. So I ain't know none of them guys, right? but I heard how guys done been molested down there, raped and all that shit. So I said to myself that night in my cell, I'm gonna kill me somebody before I let somebody molest me or whatever. So when I came out that cell, I was a whole different person, man. I
Yeah.
wasn't too friendly.
Yeah.
Then when they let me out of intake, they put me in dorm 4. And when I got there, a couple of my guys, some Apaches, right, because we were still Apaches then, was had been in the home, had been talking about me before I got there. So my name was kind of ringing. And so when we were at the gym, the guy that ran all the stones down there, a guy named Poncho, he approached me and said, "Hey man, you want to box?" I don't want to get in no trouble. I want to go home. This is my first time ever locked, right? So he pushed the issue, said, "Come on, man, we just gonna be." So I knew, if you show a guy you got some fear, it give him more courage, right? So I said, "Well, fuck it, man, come on, let's go." So we got the boxing, man. I seen he couldn't box. I folded his ass up like a napping so quick, right? That went crazy. Any other Vice Lords up in here, right? Boy, they hair up and shipped me to St. Charles. Well, I was supposed to went to camp, but they shipped me to St. Charles. And when I get to St. Charles, I was already in the same dorm in Joliet with Larry Ford. He was a football Pulaski. Some of them guys, and Prince Jerry, he was the first prince of the folk on the hustle. Prince Jerry Walker, right? So I knew them guys. So we ended up in St. Charles together. They're like, "Boy, you was a damn fool, right? You supposed to went to camp. Now you down here with us, right?" And so as time went on, I'm steady running into guys from out south, them warlords from out south, some disciples, them stones and stuff. And keep in mind, I'm off Cicero, the road. Ain't nobody never heard of Cicero. We ain't known as a black neighborhood. So I'm kind of got to defend it. Then some of my guys coming down there, they into it with guys. I'm coming out my college, going over there, man, get up off my man, dude, right? So my homies, they going home, but I'm steady getting set by Dr. Sapone. They had me to see the same psychologist that treated Richard Speck, that killed those 8 nurses.
Yeah. That was in a Jeffrey Manor, right?
Yeah,
Jeffrey Manor, yeah. Uh-huh.
yeah. They had me seeing Dr. Sapone, the same psychologist that treated him. Because they say I had a high IQ, but my behavior was contradictory to my IQ, right? The way I act. But I'm just standing up for, I'm off the road, get up off my man, right? So they started going home, and I'm steady getting set 3 months here, 6 months there. So I ended up doing 2 years down there.
Mm.
Yeah.
2 years in
But
St. Charles, and then
yeah.
you came home, and then at what point did you go back behind the wall?
But shit, I went out 2 weeks and ended up in the county jail. Yeah, I went out 2 weeks because I was a cannon. I picked pockets, right?
Yeah.
And this before I got into a con game because I was a short con artist, playing the 3-card Demolay, 3 tops with the ball, selling empty boxes and all that kind of stuff, short changing people, playing the crooked dice, with the 8 straight 5, 6, 8 flats, all that stuff. Right, but I was a cannon. I picked pockets. I ended up in the county jail after being out 2 weeks, and that was like a homecoming. All them guys that was in Little Joliet and St. Charles and me, I met them in the county jail. Shawty Freeman, all them guys, Lil Durkee, all them guys, they were disciples though, and they threw me on E2. And boy, when they threw me up on that deck and slammed them bars, now this is in Division 1, the match joint, the county jail. Boy, they threw me on E2 and threw me on that deck and slammed them bars. About 40 guys out there in the day room, and every one of them said, "Disciple." I said, "Okay, this is it." Right? I'd have been in a situation like that through St. Charles, right? So I know put my back up against the bar, so okay, nobody come behind me, right? Have them guys scared anyway. If I smack one of them here, he gonna run, So I'm ready to go, right? But they chief come out the back, Don Durkin. "What's up, B Lee?" Because in St. Charles, they call you by your first initial and your last name. He said, "What's up, B Lee, man?" "Man, shit, I don't know. You tell me," right? They got to tell them guys who I was and all that shit there. And one little guy was animated about me mugging me. And he said, "Man, if I left you in this day with this man, you be hollering for our help, man. You better be mindful who you be fucking with, man." So he told me, he said, "Man, your guys upstairs, you'll see them the next day when we go to school." So with the school the next day, I ran to China Joe and all my guys, right? Then they ended up transferring me over there. That was my first experience in the county jail. It seemed like they were setting me up to get hurt, which
Mm.
they do that kind of shit.
Yeah.
You know.
So that was your first experience in county. When did you end up at Pontiac?
Well, I was in and out the jail because I became a heroin addict. So I started catching cases more frequently.
Okay.
Because when you shoot heroin only lasts for 4 hours, and then you get sick. So you got to shoot dope every 4 hours to stay normal. So that means that you had to you spending something like a minimum. You spending a minimum of $120 a day just to keep your sick off to stay normal, right? So I had to do some serious hustling. So I moved from being a player thoroughbred to, man, I started race feeling shit. I started robbing people and all kind of jumping off moving buses, all kind of crazy shit. So I ended up with a home invasion, armed robbery, a shootout with the police, and had some hostages up north. Yeah, and I stayed in the jail maybe close to 3 years trying to get the best deal. And I finally copped out. And plus, I had 5 years probation that I violated. I ended up getting 3 to 9 years for violating that probation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up in Joliet like around April '78, and I left Joliet to Pontiac around the last part of May or early June of '78, and I was in the South Cell house. And I didn't feel comfortable over there because them guys was going to school, working jobs, and I felt like I was in a cell house full of stool pigeons. I want to be over there with guys robbing folks, extorting shit, that kind of shit.
Yeah.
So by me having the status I had as one of the heads of the Vice Lord, they had to give me some rank there, because they couldn't just put nobody over me because I was a chief from the street. And so they gave me the South Side house. I was the chief of the South Side house. But I told them I didn't want it, man. This is my first time down. I'm trying to get parole, hopefully in November, and get this to somebody that's gonna be here or been here, because I'm trying to get out of here. But they, man, no, we can't do that because of your status and all that stuff, man. So what I did, I knew that the North Side house had the printing company, the vocation over there. So I signed up to work in the printing shop. And I knew that would transfer me to the North Side house to get from under that status. Man, I transferred to the North Side house that Wednesday, and the riot happened that Saturday.
And tell us about the riot.
Well, how that happened, that was not planned and organized. A year before I got there, this brother, Roosevelt Daniel, he was a known drug dealer back there on the West Side. A year before I got there, he had knocked Brick teeth out. Brick was a Vice Lord, one of them Macateers, so-called Macateers, and knocked his teeth out. So Bro went to say it. But the Vice Lord said when he come out, they're going to hit him, right? And it was just perfect timing. The day before the riot, Roe come out of segregation. So Vice Lords did what they said. They hit Roosevelt Daniels. So Roosevelt Daniels made a comment that he gonna kill every Vice Lord in the penitentiary. So we saying, man, he got to get out of here, right? So now the Black Souls say they're gonna step up on his behalf. So we saying we're gonna come through y'all, to get to him, right? So the chief of the Black Souls, he like, man, I don't know why we at each other. There's conditions down here, and the system got us. We overpacked and crowded stuff. We need to attack the administration, right? So this big old meeting on the yard, right, with all this here. Larry Hoover was the first one to say, no, ain't no GDs up with this here. We out of here. So they walked off the yard. And so Vice Lord, we said, no, man, y'all can take that, do what y'all want with that. We ain't with that. So we walked off. But the next day, when we went to breakfast, usually when we leave breakfast, we go back to our cell, then go to the yard. But this morning, brothers got the ranking, throwing shit, cussing guards out and all that shit. It's kind of like a build up. And so instead of them sending us back to our cell, they sent us straight to the yard. And so when we get on the yard, brothers talking crazy, man, yeah, we need to really tear this motherfucker up. Ooh, one thing led to another. So on our way back to the cell house, right, I hear somebody say, man, don't let that motherfucker close that door, right? So you hear a lot of noise inside the cell house, right? They rioting, right? And man, I break through the door, and when I finally get inside, next thing I know, I got a shank through my arm and got the police like this here. So the shank is in my arm and in the police neck at the same time, right?
Damn.
Don't ask me how it happened, right? But I got a shank straight through my arm, and part of it was in the police neck. I'm trying to hold him so he don't rip my motherfucking arm and all that shit, right? So when I finally get the shank out my arm, I run upstairs, man. I'm trying to like wound, deal with my wounds, and but they still rioting and stuff. And as time went on, somebody say the National Guards is here. So they came in, and first thing they did, they locked up everybody that was in the cell house, right? Then they went to the yard, and everybody that was left outside, they made them go to the yard. Now this is July 22nd, 1978, hot to the mother. Made everybody strip butt naked on the yard, strip butt naked on the yard, face down on this hot ground. Then made them by rows stand up, walk butt naked, and as they come past police, they hit them with batons and stuff like that, and marched them in the cell houses and locked everybody up and took back control of the joint. So now it's real quiet, right?
Yeah.
So they cut the water off. They didn't feed us for about 3 days, no water. So you had to reserve the water in your toilet to drink, you
Wow.
know.
Wow.
And if you didn't have no commissary, your ass was out of there, But we had a system where Vice Lords had what they call a box, where everybody go to commissary would donate something to that box for situations like this. And then we had like 3, 4 sales that stored cigarettes, coffee, Zuzus and Wham Wham. Like when a new guy come, he gets some out the box. Or when situations like this lockdown, we can survive off stuff like that. So we had that set up. So we was kind of all right, you know. But yeah, that happened. And then they start grabbing brothers, taking them to the school, because now the Illinois Department of Law Enforcement started their investigation. And I went over there. Right? They like, well, what, man? I was in my cell. I don't know what happened. I can't tell you nothing. I was in my cell. All this stuff. Yeah, I heard some commotion, but I ain't paying no attention. I just got down. I don't know too many of these guys, so I ain't have no reason to be out. Right? So they sent me back. The next day, they sent me back over there, rousing me down to the ground, pulled my sleeves, explain how that happened. One of them GDs that flipped and told me that he saw me snatch the knife out my arm and then stab the police and all that shit there. And they rushed me to the hospital. The doctor said gangrene was setting in my arm. They might have to cut it off and all this shit here, you know. And so that was like July 78. And we stayed on lockdown till like October 14th, 78. And that's when they came and hit my cell. So I was on institution transfer. But the joint was still on lockdown. And they grabbed every guy that had a high ranking position with any street organization. And when I got on that bus and I saw Larry Hoover, King Ike, and Smokey Hill, Prince Dank, I said, oh shit, we hit all the heads. And so they shipped us from Pontiac to Stateville. And they had the death penalty. They just brought the death penalty back. So they put us on death row. That's where their house is at. Where Richard Speck lived over there. The guy that killed Aiden, that's where he lived at. So they housed us on death row, right? And we didn't have no contact with each other. And as we was over there, the guards started getting loose with us and started letting us out for the seconds here and there. To it's a room, really like a concrete room. They call the yard. We would do that, but we didn't trust each other because here we are facing the death penalty. And we from different mobs. We didn't even trust each other. But the indictments didn't come down to March 79. The next year, and they charged each one of us with 15 counts of murder, 2 attempt murder, and mob action. And Mr. Farrakhan was just rebuilding the Nation of Islam because the Honorable Elijah Muhammad had just died. In 75, 76, he had just died, and the Nation of Islam fell apart. You know, and Farrakhan would tell you he went to smoking cheap cigars and drinking cheap wine and stuff. So he was just rebuilding the Nation of Islam. And so they let him in to talk to us, right? And he explained to us that 300 years ago was the conspiracy when black men were taught not to trust each other through that Willie Lynch formula. But here we are facing a death penalty. We look at each other as opposition, that we ain't got a chance in court. And that's when we realized we had to become brothers for real. So we started organizing ourselves and we formed different committees. You know, we had the financial committee, the political committee, the communication committee, you know. So, but the way we did it, a member from each street organization made up the committee. We didn't want, say, the Vice Lords become one committee, the disciples become a committee. We wanted every committee to have a brother from each organization on there, and that would force us to build relationships with each other. And so once we established that, then the brothers behind the walls, they did the same thing behind the walls. You know, the disciples, the Stones, the Vice Lords, all of them got together and they formed the same committees. I was over the communication committee. So I would communicate with brothers behind the wall that was on the communication committee, what was going on with our case and all that stuff. Then they would communicate that throughout the whole prison population. And then brothers on the streets, they formed the same committee. It was just in our favor that a lot of brothers was on the streets. You know, Willie Law was on the streets, King Neal, Hanif, uh, a lot of them guys was on the streets, right?
Yeah.
Godfather, AJ, all of them was on the streets, right? And so they formed the same committee on the streets that we had and what they had. And when we would write and we would end our letters with your brother in the struggle. So they gave us the name Brothers of the Struggle. So we became the original boss, Brothers of the Struggle. You know, but as God have it, we got acquitted on all charges because, you know, we used Governor Thompson's statement the night of the riot when he, uh, at the press conference, he said that they expected that riot a year ago because Pontiac prison was designed to house 600 inmates. And on the day of the riot, it was over 2,000 inmates.
Wow.
Even the officers was in conflict with the administration, and then inmates was in conflict with the officers, and inmates was in conflict with each other because of these conditions. So that helped us. Plus, we had a scientist testify that under those kind of conditions, everybody felt like a suspect, and people would do anything to get from under those conditions. And so we was able to challenge some of the state witnesses, which was inmates, that yeah, in fact, they got good time for their testimony. You know, a lot of them use A-list names. So they brought out that you will tell a lie. Yeah, you are a criminal. And none of us took the stand. So we looked at like church boys with our ties on, helping our lawyers with their seat and all that stuff. And these guys, they looked at like criminals because they was testifying that they was in prison for this, they lied, all that kind of stuff. So we ended up getting acquitted, the first 10 of us, because it was 17 of us at first, and one black soul, Angela Robinson, he turned state evidence. And so that broke it down to 16 of us. And then when we pushed for trial, one GD and one New Breed decided they wanted to a speedy trial also. And they joined, and that made it 10 of us. So that made it 10 of us. And so we went to trial and we beat the case out, got acquitted. And so they knew they couldn't use the same evidence against Larry Hoover, them the remaining 6. So they just threw the case out of them. But we was the Pontiac, first we was the Pontiac 29. Because they shipped 29 of us in October from Pontiac to Stateville. Then they brought 2 more down and made it the Pontiac 31. Then when the indictments came down, we were the Pontiac 17. And then them guys that got charged for breaking and looting and hurting officers, they indicted 14 of them and they became the Pontiac 14. So you had the Pontiac 14 and the Pontiac 17. And then when one 17 turned state, we became the Pontiac 16. And then when we went to trial, we became the Pontiac 10. And then when Larry Hoover and them was up, then they become the Pontiac 6. And then
It just kept going down.
Pontiac 14.
Okay, so yeah, it just kept going down and down. And God is great that y'all got acquitted from that chaotic, and tragic situation. So what year were you fully and finally released from prison, Benny Lee?
I call a case February 28th, 1984. Called a bogus attempt burglary. Some little guys were breaking in a store in Moscow on Adams and Cicero, and they ran out the store. And as they ran out, I walked up. The police came and locked me up for attempt burglary. And that's when I went to the county jail. And a homeboy of mine was telling me that I can file to be a drug addict, and Mike can go to drug treatment as opposed to going to prison. And I went through the process to do that. And the state's attorney tried to reject it because of my background. Said I was a known gang leader. I've been charged with gang racketeering and murder, da da da. But the judge, he asked why should he mandate me, and I told him, because it's cold outside. You let me go this morning, I'm gonna be forced to go take a coat. I've been to penitentiary 3 times. I don't really want to go back. This program can help me. And he believed me, and he mandated me to treatment. I walked out the county jail November 15, 1984. That was 37 years ago. I ain't been back since.
1984. That's amazing. And you made a comment. The state attorney was trying to keep you in there. Was that Richard Daley?
Well, you had a state's attorney, but then every courtroom got a state's attorney walk out the state's attorney's office.
Got it. Okay.
Daley was not the state's attorney at the time.
Okay.
It was state's attorney Curry. He was the state's attorney at the
time. Okay. But yeah, so you got out in 84. You never looked back. So what is your life like now? You obviously you're a professor.
Well, my life now is I'm trying to rest.
Yeah.
I'm trying to step back from a lot of what I do now. If I made my transition right now, a lot of people got a lot to say about me. My obituary would be something people would be proud of, I think, because I done made some accomplishments, even in substance abuse. When I became a certified drug abuse counselor, they would discharge drug addicts that had criminal backgrounds prematurely because they didn't know how to deal with them. And I'm the one came up with a training. How do you train counselors to deal with criminal justice substance abuse? I got an award for that stuff, Mm-hmm. Then I did another training on how do you work with gang affiliated substance abusers, because I just believe like the Association of Black Psychologists, Dr. Wade Nobles, Dr. James Small, Dr. Naeem Akbar, Dr. Asa Hurley, we got a black psychology. Our psychology is different from white psychology. And I bought into that, through the help of sisters like Beverly Hamilton Robinson and Dr. Hattie Wash. They mentored me and gave me this understanding that you got to treat clients from a cultural context. So I started studying them and, looking at the psychology of Black people, how that came about, how it was shaped and stuff. And that gave me my foundation. And I rose up, and I became like every year in Illinois, they give a Professional of the Year award to one substance abuse counselor throughout the whole state. And I earned that award, I think it was in 2000, I got that award. And then they have a national award. The Johnson Institute give a national award to success stories throughout the nation. And I got that award somewhere around in 2004. I had to go to DC to get that, receive that award.
Okay.
So I done did a lot of things, I done helped change legislation dealing with convicted felons. I've done trainings over in Ghana. I spent the month in Ghana doing trainings over there. I spent the month in Israel in 93, being pulled over there to talk about youth violence. And I was doing all that, and I didn't even have a degree. All I had was a GED and my certification. Yeah. I didn't get my degree until I got my bachelor's degree, I think it was in 2003. It took me 10 years to get it because I go to school for a semester, don't go back for 2 years, go back for maybe 2 semesters, then won't come back for 3 years. It took me 10 years to finally get that bachelor's degree. But then once I got the bachelor's degree, I just went full-fledged and went for my master's degree. But while I was in school, a lot of those professors would have me to come speak in their classes. Like the classes on theories of criminal behavior or introduction to criminal justice or Chicago gangs. Yeah, I ended up getting my master's degree, and right after I got my master's degree, uh, the university approached me and asked me would I be teaching a class on the history of Chicago street gangs. Mm-hmm. But by that time, I rose up and became the director of a program and interventions. And when I left there, they had just opened Sheridan Prison, and the whole prison is treatment. And Deanne Benos, she was the assistant director of all the prisons in Illinois. One of the internal affairs, the director of internal affairs for the prison, she would host these Project Safe Neighborhood forums. That's for any person coming out of the Illinois prison, got guns in their back, right? They had to come to this forum. It was mandatory. And they would have me speak at those forums and let them brothers know I sat where they sitting there and I don't know how to live a life without a gun. And they was impressed on my deliverance and how the guys respected me. And so they invited the assistant director to hear me, right? Because they had just opened up Sheridan Prison. And so she approached me and said that I would be the ideal person to be part of this project. Because Governor Blagojevich at the time, he knew that over 70% of the people in Illinois prisons been there before. A lot of them been there for drugs and alcohol related cases. And so he opened a prison where every inmate there was in drug rehab. Because he believed they got treated for their drug problem while they was in prison. They have a chance not to recidivate once they come home. And so she approached me and asked me what I think about becoming part of that project. And I told her I ain't trying to work in no prison. I done had my days in prison. So about a month later, they had a hearing down at City Hall, treatment on demand. Congressman Davis and LaShawn Ford, all of them got together because they noticed how a lot of people in the Black community got drug problems, wouldn't access treatment, but they end up locked up or in jail, and they wanted to cut that down. So they asked me to testify as an expert witness, right? And Deanne Benos, assistant director, she was there. So she asked me would I be willing to meet her in her office at the State Building so we can just talk. So I said, okay, ain't nothing to lose. So she was explaining that I would be ideal for this project because one, I'm an ex-con, two, I'm a recovering addict, I'm a certified drug abuse counselor, I done read drug programs, right? And then I understand this whole recidivism and reentry piece. So I told her, look, I done been a director of program, I done managed budgets, I done did staff development, I'm trying to move to be like a consultant, So she asked, what will it take to bring me on board? And I told her the dollar amount, what I need, all that stuff. So they created a position for me, community liaison / reentry specialist. So that's my title for the Illinois Department of Correction. I got an ID that allow me in any prison. And so that's how that happened, along with me becoming a professor at the university around the same time, right? And then I started getting asked to speak on different panels and hearings and invited to conferences in other states and stuff like that, right? And so I got pretty much a name for myself in doing this work,
Absolutely.
Kind of like Malcolm X, how he vowed when he come out of prison that he gonna speak the truth about Black people. So I vowed that I'm gonna speak on the behalf of convicted felons.
And and so to wrap up, let's end on that note. To speak on behalf of convicted felons, you were a chief. You're out, you're free, you're able to live life. Obviously, you're not a threat to society and none of those things. What are your thoughts on other of your other former gang leaders in Chicago that are still behind bars? Like, do you believe they should be freed as well?
Well, I believe, I truly believe in due process of the law. You know, when I committed a crime, I accept the fact I committed a crime. And now I'm conscious enough to know that most of our crimes is black on black crime, right? And so I deserve what had come to me. Now, I don't agree with the conditions of the prisons because now we don't have an opportunity to develop ourselves. They don't give us the necessary tools, and they don't have an educational system in play to prepare us to come out. And that was my biggest fight. But now you got some guys in my age group, now they done died out, man. You can't rely on them guys, man. Them guys need to just do like me, reinvent themselves. Because we don't have that influence on these little guys like we used to.
Yeah, and you know, like specifically like Larry Hoover, Jeff Fort, those guys.
Yeah, you know, like if a young guy, if I said something to a little vice lord today, he ain't got to worry about me making his ass yield. Because you know I ain't finna pick no gun up today. I ain't finna bust his head with no bat. I ain't finna do none of that. So they ain't worried about me. You know what I'm saying? And any brother in my age bracket that think like that, he ain't for a rude worker. Because these little brothers, like I was telling one of my homies, KT, he was asking me how I'm dealing with all this violence out here. I said, man, shit, I accept the fact I'm old, man. You know, these little guys, man, they ain't gonna hesitate. I hesitate. See, if I had a gun, I hesitate. I'd freeze. I think twice. These little guys, they ain't thinking twice. I can't compete against that. They you know, when we were young, we wouldn't hesitate. But I ain't young no more. Yeah. So I just believe that these guys need to reinvent themselves and find a different, you know, because we had an era, and that era over. You know, like Muhammad Ali had an era when he was a boxer, and he moved into a new era, and he started speaking on world circuits, right? And he became a truly Islamic minister. He moved into a different era, right? I'm in a different era now. My era is writing books, producing documentaries, educating those that's coming behind me that's deciding to get into this kind of work. This is what this looks like. That's the era I'm in now. You know, I'm in my winter years. I'm in my winter years, man. I got more years behind me than I have in front of me.
But with everything that you're doing now, you in your golden era, though.
Yeah, I got 2 grandsons that I'm trying to pray that I live long enough to see them move on, you know.
If you enjoyed this podcast, I ask for 2 things. Number 1, leave a 5-star review. And number 2, pass it on to a friend who may enjoy it as well. And don't forget to subscribe to our other podcast, Mogul Motivation from True Stories Media.